The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. I am so glad you could join us this morning. My name is Anna Hobson, and I am from HR Simple, and I will be moderating today. Today's webinar is in partnership with Constangy and the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce. Today's speaker is John MacDonald from Constangy. The presentation will be an hour long. If you have any questions, please submit them in the question box, and John will get to them when he can. If you would like to watch more webinars, please go to hrsimple.com/events, and you will see a listing of webinars from Constangy, the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and other reliable sources. John is not only lead partner at the Constangy, New Jersey office, but author of the New Jersey Human Resources Manual. This in-depth HR guide helps you with everything from pre-hire through post-termination. The publication is prepared exclusively for New Jersey employers and made available by the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce to provide reliable information to the New Jersey business community. To thank you for your attendance today, we're offering 40% off the manual at hrsimple.com/NJ. And before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to learn a little more about John. John is the office head of the firm's Princeton office. He concentrates his practice in the area of employment and labor litigation with an emphasis on discrimination litigation, employment counseling, restrictive covenant litigation, and FINRA securities arbitration. John has extensive trial experience in both state and federal courts in New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New York. John has argued cases before the New Jersey Appellate Division, the New Jersey Supreme Court, and before the United States Third Circuit Court of Appeals. So on that note, I'm going to hand things over to John so we can go ahead and get started this morning.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to hit this show my screen there. Anna, is that good?
It looks great.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks. Well, thanks for coming to a seminar called Tired of Talking About COVID. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think you can all appreciate that. And I do have a few preliminary comments to make. First off, as we move through, feel free to ask questions or just put other comments in the chat, and then I'll either pick up on it or Anna will notice it, and then we can talk about it as we go along. That would be great. The second is just some more general comments based really upon the title of today's little talk, which is I really appreciate talking to this crowd because as an employment lawyer, I think HR people are the only other people who really get us and appreciate what we've had to deal with for the past year. And I've certainly suggested to all of the in-house counsel that I deal with and everyone else that we give as much time off as we can to our HR folks this summer and this fall, because not only because of last year, but also because of what I perceive the rollout is going to be in the return to work sphere. I'm sure a lot of you noticed that over the past year, you've had to add some specialties to your resume, including, I made a little list this morning. You've had to perfect your skills as a psychotherapist to your employees. You had to become a Zoom etiquette specialist, partial IT technician, and of course, what HR is used to being, which is the problem solver, problem dumpster, where everybody, I'm sure last year that couldn't think of the answer went right to HR and said, well, just let them handle it. So I've been on the sort of receiving end of that as well. So I feel your pain in that regard. It's not over yet, but it's certainly getting there. And the reason I bring that up is because although remarkably few mistakes were made last year, I think by employers in general, this rollout now, the return to work is the next great opportunity we have to make mistakes. So that's why we're having this little talk today, and then hopefully between the slides and the comments and questions, we can get ahead of a few of these problems, stop them from happening. But again, by way of introduction, before I get into these slides, there are a few articles that I think are being sent to you by Anna that I just wanted to raise at this point. There are 3 Forbes articles that I thought were apropos of the subject. The first one was from October of last year, and the title was "Working Remote Leads to Mental Health Challenges. Here's How to Cope." And in the article, the author says that the study found 75% of people were suffering from workplace or isolation, social isolation. 78% of the global workforce reported negative impacts on their mental health. 42% said their productivity had plummeted. And this was something I really paid attention to, which is 41% say they are challenged because there's less distinction between their work life and their home life. And that's one I want to focus on a bit as we move along today. I think we all noticed that it started off very positive in terms of what people thought remote work would be, and we're learning now about what it can't be. And so there are some distinctions there. Same number. This is another article from February of this year, so just recently. Return to Work 2021. What will the post-pandemic office model look like? And there were some interesting numbers in here. Again, they focused on new types of work-related stress, largely stemming from workers being unable to separate their work and their home lives. And 7 out of 10 workers said the pandemic had been the most stressful time in their professional lives. It goes on with the struggle, the work from home fatigue, the struggle to separate the 2 functions, and I think it's worth looking at because that's something that we're going to be facing as we move forward. And the last article I think you can see a link to from Anna is how COVID-19 changed the culture and what to do about it. This is actually from January, and what it does talk about is that the companies that had a very strong culture survived quite well in this, and the ones that didn't have not fared as well. That article, which I'll launch off of, does give a few recommendations, and one of them is to restate your mission, values, and mission at this point, to recalibrate your goal setting, execute a feedback loop, and then what I liked, which is recommit to training. Because I think that it's important to take a deep breath at this point and think about that. What changed, what we lost, and what we need to do going forward. Because you as HR, you're in a kind of a unique position. You may hear from management. They may want ideas from you. They may want suggestions, et cetera. They may want you to cure some of these woes. But things like the social aspects of work, the training aspects, the mentoring, those were things that just got put on hold last year. And although there were productivity gains at the beginning, I think we were basically running on past efforts and past endeavors in the corporate world to create cultures and create training and mentorship and teams, real teams, not the kind on the computer, that we were just riding on. So the struggle is going to be, I think, the tension between companies that want to save money by, as we bring people back into work, keeping people remote, et cetera, and on the other side of the coin, the realization that we really do need to bring people back to work, and we can't operate on Zoom calls, and that's where we come in to this seminar today. So that being said, what I want to do today is really walk through, again, I know it's painful, but walk through the nuts and bolts of bringing people back in. And I do have some additional information for you about the current state of, especially in New Jersey, the law vis-a-vis vaccinations and time off for vaccinations, what we can do to encourage people to get vaccinated, and what we can't do, and what issues may arise as a result of us promoting vaccinations, et cetera. But that's what I have by way of introduction. I'm just going to check the chatting area. Okay, I don't see anything. Let's see. Nothing yet. You're a quiet crowd today. Okay, so the first slide is obviously very general. And we'll run through these big topics quite quickly. The reintegration of the workforce. This is an area where we can make mistakes, and this is an area where you're going to get some tension between the business channel and your HR function, because it's wise for you to think of the reintegration as almost a reverse RIF. So in other words, instead of a reduction of force going out, we're bringing them back in a staged way. This leads to questions, of course, of equal treatment and who's being selected to come back, why are they being selected to come back, how this affects various teams, who gets to be in the office when other people are there, et cetera. And I will say on this general question that the good news is that you can rely on your training. I mean, what you learned before COVID still largely applies to post-COVID in terms of the basics, in terms of treating everybody, as I said, in a logical, performance-based way. So when you hear these questions coming at you from the business channel, just bear that in mind. Treat it almost, like I said, like a reverse RIF. Treat them like you're bringing in new employees, and you want to be very careful to have a rationale for what you're doing, a legitimate, non-discriminatory rationale for that decision-making process. Legal compliance during and after the COVID pandemic, obviously we'll go into that in some detail, but generally speaking, rely on your training. Rely on what you learned, and you can still apply that today without necessarily worrying about COVID-specific regulation. Responding to leave and accommodation issues. This is the tough one. I've already dealt with this. I'm sure you have too, which is, at least during, New Jersey still is largely not inoculated, but there certainly have been questions about accommodation vis-a-vis people not wanting to come back to the office as a result of having an elderly relative or someone who might have some COVID issues, et cetera. That will continue to be an issue throughout this year. Preparing for the future, I'll get into that, but you obviously want to develop a plan in conjunction with management on that. And as far as resources go, again, I would say that you want to lean back on what you already know, which should be somewhat reassuring. And at the same time, realize that this is fairly uncharted territory. Okay, this is going to be somewhat annoying. So you've seen this all before. I have this here because it's important for people who are coming back in. You're going to get that. You're going to get the question, especially of people who do not want to return to work, to return to the office, I should say. What have you done? Especially if you're doing a big town hall meeting, which presumably a lot of you are doing with employees, you want to be able to go through at least the general description of physically what you have done to make the workplace safe. That'll get ahead of a lot of questions and complaints and gripes and things of that nature, because there is going to be a good portion of the workforce that does enjoy working out of the office, or has a legitimate reason why they feel concerned. So obviously you're going to follow the CDC guidelines. This list of things in part looks a little dated at the moment, but it really isn't. So in terms of staggering work schedules, et cetera, that's what most of our clients are doing right now in terms of bringing people back in. So the minimizing equipment sharing, yeah. I think in terms of providing the basic PPP, that's all being done anyway. You probably already have that done. But I would keep something like this list in mind, particularly when you're dealing with management, to make sure that you've checked off all of the boxes. People will want to know this. I've received a few questions about air filters and things of that nature. There's a lot of concern still about the hybrid elements of COVID and different strains, et cetera. So I think if you've used this slide as a bit of a checklist and gotten ahead of a lot of this, then you'll avoid a lot of potentially awkward questions coming at you later. again, this is where today we're in that period where the COVID numbers did come down pretty dramatically, but then they stalled a bit. So it's unclear how many more months we're going to have to deal with issues like this. Let's say your installation of physical barriers, you may have already done this to some degree, or you may be dealing with the issue of removing some of them at this point as you move along. I would say that with something like physical barriers, you want to know why you're doing it, why you're putting them in, why you're taking them out. And obviously, as HR, you're feeling a little bit odd here that you're suddenly being thrown in kind of the medical expert area, but hopefully you're going to get some outside guidance on that. But be prepared for questions from employees about, why is this barrier here? I'm inoculated, or why isn't there a barrier here? I'm still concerned, etc. You want to take a very, I'm using the word accommodating in a very general sense here, a very accommodating approach to that kind of thing is my suggestion to you. The law is going to give you a pretty big safe harbor if you are acting reasonably, but also you're accommodating people a bit on that front. The 6 feet thing, it may not be practical in a cube environment. It's not practical in hallways, etc. You may have to deal with people who are, I would say, very strict about this kind of thing. And again, you want to just be as accommodating as you can. Take into consideration that you're going to have people who are extremely paranoid about this, and then people who just don't care. And you will probably have a lot of knocks on your office door or your Zoom window about someone violating someone else's space. Just be prepared in advance for that. Yeah, the outside personnel delivery issue only really applies to a limited number of your personnel, but you want to get a look at that and just see, as a practical matter, how that's rolling out. How is that happening? Are the vendors, are the delivery people following the protocols that you've established, and make sure that they are. The reminder signs, you're probably already up. I know a lot of people may be tempted to take those down. Don't. You want to leave those up. They're not going to hurt anything, and there's no particular reason to take those down at the moment. I don't know if you all follow this as closely as I do, but because of certain statutes like the New Jersey WARN Act, I pay very close attention to the governor's office in terms of the orders that he's putting out. And we are now still in an emergency, health emergency order. He's done numerous orders extending that. The most recent one was in February, and it's a bit open-ended. So we are still in a state health emergency edict. So I would leave signs up. I would err on the side of caution. Let's put it that way. Again, we're in fairly uncharted territory, but when you've got the governor of your state saying you're in a medical health emergency, the law is going to be on your side if you tend to be a little stricter on these things. The signs that people who are either currently with COVID or think they have COVID or symptoms or whatever, you definitely want to leave those up. You want to follow the CDC guidelines and the New Jersey state guidelines on people who've had symptoms, et cetera. Just keep doing it. Yeah, I suggested town hall meetings before. I don't know what your particular method is going to be for communicating to employees. They do feel very isolated. I'm sure you know that. I don't need to tell you that. But so the more is better is what we're strongly suggesting. And in the context of a town hall meeting, this is a great way of getting out this kind of information, answering a bunch of questions, etc. I will say, if you're going to have one, make sure that you are prepared to answer all of these questions, and you don't want to get caught flat-footed on that. But we do recommend more communication is better. As far as your general take on whether you're going to, how you're going to bring people back, into what skills you're going to, which areas of work you're going to bring them back to, just some general ideas here. The state of New Jersey certainly, and CDC has certainly suggested that if you can work remotely, you continue to work remotely for a little bit of time. That is going to conflict a bit with reality when we would have to bring in certain people back, certain teams have to be in place before certain other teams can work, etc. You want to work with management, keeping in mind that kind of general thought that if people can avoid coming back until the numbers get a little bit better and they can do their jobs remotely, that's certainly the most logical reason for keeping people out, if you're looking for legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons. The next point, I think, would be covered in a town hall. But you would get questions on who's being, you may be questioned about the plan. What is the plan? Who's being asked to come back and why, etc. So I certainly wouldn't have a town hall on that kind of, with that kind of scope until you have a plan in place and have run through what the answer to that question is going to be, because your take may be a little bit different than management's take on that particular question. As far as monitoring public health and providing the information to employees, I think obviously you are monitoring the health communications coming out of the governor's office and the state of New Jersey as much as you can. It's particularly with regard to how many people can come together inside of buildings and restaurants and all that kind of thing. Obviously, keep an eye on that. I don't think you need to be in the business of republishing that information all the time. Every time something happens, you don't need to send an email to the employees. But if it relates to the employment environment, then it's certainly not a bad idea. Checking the chat here. Let's see. Aha, here's a question. I'm sorry, I missed that before. It says, our physical space doesn't have the space for 6 feet apart. Should we do a hybrid setup to have employees come in on different days? Generally, yes. The answer would be yes. If it's feasible in your business model, then absolutely, you want to avoid that problem. And that is how most people are handling that. There are a lot of office spaces that do not have 6-foot hallways. Well, they have 6-foot hallways, but you put 2 people in it, and it's no longer a 6-foot hallway. So yes, I would say that you should certainly do that if you can. Second question is, what are the guidelines for an occupied office? 6 feet, masks on or off. Example, office of 2 or 3 people. If they're 6 feet apart, must they wear masks? Yeah, you want to. That's a good question, especially if they're in a cube. What are you going to do? The easy answer is yes. The more sophisticated answer, I suppose, with all of this is you have to take into account some people may have medical needs where they're not comfortable wearing a mask all day. They may have some asthma, for example, or other medical issues that just make that impractical. So I would be not strict with these to that degree, or if you're going to require it, just make sure you've asked the question whether or not anyone has an accommodation or has a need where they can't wear something like that all of the time. There's a certain amount of common sense involved in this too. So if you have if you say cubicles with high walls, that may be a different environment. I'm in an office environment with a door right now, for example, but if it's in an open bull pit, that's going to be something else. If it's an open kind of bullpen area and you're 6 feet away from someone else, it's medically kind of on the borderline there, but I would look at CDC guidelines and follow those as close as you can. Again, bearing in mind that there will be people who just can't deal with that. So the problem is going to be in that scenario is that one person 6 foot away is going to say, I don't need to wear a mask, I just got vaccinated. And the other person is going to say, no, I want that person to wear it. And when you're dealing with that kind of a dynamic, you're going to have to go to the person who doesn't wear it and say, hey, this person feels uncomfortable. What can we do to compromise, that kind of thing. So I would say common sense compromises, leaning leaning towards the CDC guidelines on that. but just to follow up on that question, there's going to be no strict legal requirement that you have to follow there. I would just follow CDC as best you can. Okay, so this, let's see. Yeah, there is a lot of anxiety out there among employees, particularly in the bigger systems where people are coming back in larger groups. I think you've already done this, but if you're in a smaller firm that doesn't have an established go-to person or go-to team to deal with the type of concern I just spoke about, such as someone who doesn't wear a mask within a few feet of someone who does, or someone who just got vaccinated, et cetera. So just have a system, just like you would on discriminatory complaints or any other complaints, OSHA complaints, that a system that takes in that information, that logs it, deals with it, and resolves it. I think that's fairly obvious to you all, but it probably needs to be said. I think in particular, if your folks have been completely out of the office with a skeleton crew and now you're coming back in, you want to make sure that reporting resolution system is in place. That I would say you definitely want to do. I think, although we obviously don't have any cases on this, but I think if a mistake that could be made would be in not handling that issue, not setting up a structure for dealing with that inside of HR. That could be considered negligent later on down the road if something goes wrong. So I would stress that point. The FFCRA information is, yes, but it's largely dated at this point. And then as far as circulating new policies, procedures, that's something you're going to do, of course. I think the tricky part is going to be when do you end it? But I'll get to that later. Okay. Let me move this slide. Okay, this slide deals with issues that I think we dealt with in the question. You want to have a written plan, a written basis for why you're bringing people back and in what capacity you're bringing people back in. I think this crowd knows quite well at this point that employees do not have the right to simply say, I don't want to come back, or I don't feel like I can come back until you tell me that you've done X, Y, and Z. Employees do not have that right. You will probably face something like that, and when push comes to shove, you will be able to take disciplinary action. I would be very soft on that, but if you do come across an employee that just refuses to come back because of their understanding of what they think they want in terms of safety, that's not going to be supported legally for them, unless of course there's some kind of ADA issue involved. These are suggestions in terms of obviously how you bring people back is going to be driven by the business model, but yes, if they can do it remotely, you want to leave those people out there. If they can't, then you need to bring them in. But the business model will drive things. Just make sure that your logic follows a business model, that there is not a disparate impact on certain groups of workers, et cetera. Again, treat it like a layoff situation where you're being careful that you're not impacting certain groups or classes of employees as you bring them back in. Because they will say, look, the person who came back in has more opportunities, they get to see people, they get to be mentored, et cetera. So just be wary of that. My personal opinion is that we're going to be back or not back in largely by the summer. So there's not a huge window here to make mistakes. Just be careful. Checking for questions here. Oh, okay. This, again, is a little bit dated at this point, but I've had these issues come up very recently, actually. So say the first issue, which is, do you limit travel, business travel, presumably? I had it in the context of someone who wanted to go visit a relative in Florida, and because of state travel situations with New Jersey and limitations in New Jersey, that became a real problem with the quarantining, et cetera. So that is something obviously to keep an eye on. How you do that, again, should be driven by the business model, but you want to be reasonable. Okay, I think I've handled most of the other issues on this slide, so I'm going to move on. There's a third question. It says, we have more than 10 employees. Should we limit the people in the office to 10? You want to look at the occupancy of the office, I think, in that respect. I can't answer that question without knowing what availability you have for more employees. You want to keep an eye on what, obviously, the governor is telling us. The question was, we have more than 10 employees. Should we limit the people in the office to 10? And again, I would need to know more about what the physical capacity of the office space is. But there's certainly no harm in staging that. Bringing in, you have 10 people, you bring in, 3 or 4, or maybe 5 on their days, things like that. Staggering it for the first while is a recommended way to go at this point.
John, it looks like we also have 2 more questions in addition to that. I can read them off to you or send them.
Yeah, if you would, thanks.
Sure. So the first one is there a way to have notified returning workers of the new policies back in the office?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is there a way to notify returning workers of the new policies back in the office?
Back in the office. Well, I mean, I'm not sure I understand. How do you understand that question?
I'm assuming just like the best way to notify workers about the guidelines and the regulations of coming back into the office.
I get it. So, in what format, I suppose, would you do that? If you have it all set up and if you're really ready to go, I like the town hall thing. It gets it done quickly. Everybody has their chance to raise their question, and there's no question that everybody heard the information. Emailing memos, it's not the greatest, I suppose, or calling people or Zooming people. These are all options, of course. I guess the question could also be, is it best in writing? Is it best verbally? That's why I like the town hall bit, because you don't want employees saying, well, this was your written policy a week ago, now you can't change it later. Of course you can change it later. So I would say whatever way you go, you want it to be clear, you want it to be unambiguous, and you want to leave yourself room. So I would avoid corporate speak. I would give it to them in a very straightforward fashion, and I would specifically reserve on changes and say, look, this is what we're doing now. This may change in the very near future as we move through this, and we're going to keep you posted on that. But what you don't want to do, if I can answer that question even more directly, is give some information to some people and some information to other people, because they will all start commingling this information and there will be confusion. And the last thing you want is a non-uniform message. So I hope that answers the question. I think town hall is great. If you can't do a town hall and you can only get it out by, say, email, I would just be clear, unambiguous, and reserve the right to change the policies as you move along.
And then I had the attendee follow up with that question and say, where should I put the notices and guidelines? For example, should I put them in the break room, or just in which public area should I put those in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would put them in the same place that you put your other postings. So you're certainly going to be safe if you do that. I would treat it just like a posting. If it's a poster regarding, the kind of hand washing thing, or those cute little plastic posters we have everywhere about wearing masks, etc. You put those wherever you want, of course. But if it's policy or legal or policy legal, then I would put it right up on the board next to your FMLA posting and everything else. If you want, you can have like a special COVID board if you want to make it very clear to them where to look. It depends how many resources you have. Some companies have just areas on their intranets where that information is posted. Was there another one?
Yes, we have one more. With the state health emergency still in place, can you force an employee to come back if they have remote capabilities?
Yeah, that's interesting. The answer is yes. There is certainly the CDC and to some extent the state of New Jersey has had that recommendation in play for some time. And the real tough part of that question was at the beginning of COVID, when they said, well, if they're capable of working remotely, then you must let them work remotely. I think that's being taken more as a suggestion at this point than a mandate. And so your employees are not going to have that kind of control where they can dictate where they work. The way to avoid problems on that is to well, I mean, some jobs are very difficult to say that there's just no reason to come into the office. For example, you may have been remote before, but we've handled that with either making it an element of the job or saying that, look, we need to reintegrate, we need to retrain. In other words, you make it as a part of the job requirement that they spend at least some time in the office, and then you can kind of avoid that issue of, oh no, I can do 100% of my job from home kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I see where the question comes from. It's from certainly the early COVID orders. But I would take that more as a suggestion, and if push comes to shove, I would just add that as the job requirement that they come back in. I know that's a slightly subtle answer, but that's how I would do it. Yeah, we've been out for 8 months. We've been out for a year. You know, you hear the argument that you can do the job 100% remote, but you can't. You know, we need to have you back in for these purposes, and just handle it that way. Okay, back to the slides. Anna, interrupt me if you got another question. The daily health surveys, I still do this to this day. I will confess, especially if I'm alone, I don't take my own temperature. But this is going to appear to be somewhat dated. I think you just keep doing it. You keep doing it. As one of the questioners said, there's still a health emergency. So you keep doing that until, I would say, until that health emergency is lifted. You will get questions from people who are already vaccinated on that point. And while it may not seem entirely logical that they would continue to have to be tested, et cetera, I would just keep doing it until someone from the state tells us that we don't have to do it. Yeah, employee illness or exposure. Again, this is going to be this is a little bit dated at this point, but it's still very possible. There are plenty of people still getting this disease in New Jersey, and particularly in the northern counties, in the northeastern counties. So you want to continue the structure which you undoubtedly already have in place, vis-a-vis dealing with employee illness and employee family illness and things like that. Keep doing what you're doing until someone from the state tells us to stop doing that type of procedure. Because as I said, there's still hundreds and hundreds of people getting this in New Jersey on a weekly basis. This is a flow chart that we use. It goes to the chat question a little bit earlier, which is selecting, how you bring people back in, and to some degree the selection of who comes back in. This is more to the medical quarantining question. So these are good slides to have at your disposal. I'm sure you already have something like this in terms of a flow chart for how you handle quarantining and contact tracing and things of that nature. So use that for these purposes. Yeah, on here, I'm sure you've already dealt with most of these issues. You may have not dealt with number 4 because people have been remote. So I've certainly seen this happen plenty of times. The other issue can be on number 4, for example, if you're in in a building that has a bunch of offices, and the rumor goes around that someone in the, not necessarily in your company, but in the next office has COVID or has picked it up, or their kid had it or something along those lines. These get to be somewhat tricky to deal with. Number 4 was always a problem for us last year because the EEOC was not overly happy about having people notified about other people's illnesses. So that's largely been dealt with, but you certainly want to have a policy on how you're going to do it, what you're going to do, et cetera. And also you have to deal with the employees that will be extremely paranoid after that if someone goes out and if they've contracted the disease, about their workspace and the air and that kind of a thing. So again, if you've been all remote this whole time, you haven't had to deal with this issue. If you're coming back in and someone picks it up, my daughter's going to spring break in Florida, so she may come back with something. These things still happen, and as we move back into the workplace, undoubtedly you will come across this issue. So just be particularly cautious of number 4 and how you would deal with that. I know some people I've spoken to over the past year that have had to deal with this issue in absentia. In other words, the other employee that they're used to dealing with on Zoom calls or whatever picks up COVID. What do we tell them? Of course, they don't tell them anything in that scenario. But here, where it's in the physical workplace, you do need a policy, and you do need to be prepared to answer those questions: who you're going to notify, what you're going to tell them, etc. But just bear in mind, you've probably all been trained on this one with what the EEOC says about that. The concern, if you want to get a little deeper here on this, was based on ADA and privacy issues. Yeah, here it's a somewhat difficult question when you bring people back in stages, or in say every other day, or this group will come in on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, that kind of thing, because it gets a little awkward with how the office is running as an entity, with some on Zoom, some in the office, some wherever. So cross training, I think, is going to be very important, even as we see COVID kind of dissipating over the next few months. Who knows where this goes? Who knows if something else comes back in the fall? I think there's a new emphasis on cross training. Yeah, succession plans, right? This is all rather common sense stuff. The third point: identify your fundamental business operations. Again, this seems a little dated, but when you bring them back into the office, this is what you want to be focusing on. And if someone has it in the chat, oh, here's more in the chat. I'd be curious to know what pressures you're getting from management on some of these issues. Okay, so here's question 4. What are the regulations about encouraging and tracking? Okay, here we go. All right, I need to go back a little bit further. I'm sorry. So yeah, question. Okay, are there things we can't ask about family members' personal travel and non-work related stuff? Okay, one at a time. So about family members, yeah, you don't ask them anything unless you have reason to believe, or they tell you that there's an issue with a family member, just the same as you would under normal circumstances. Personal travel, yeah, I'll give you a scenario. So let's say they want to go on vacation next week to Florida and then come back into New Jersey. That can be an issue. And when that came up for a client around Thanksgiving of this past fall, and what we had to basically advise the person as well, no, we can't have you leaving now. You can't take vacation now under these circumstances, because vacation, of course, in New Jersey, the employer gets to dictate when you take that, unless there's some special agreement otherwise. And we just said no, because of the fact that they would go and then have to return, and then not only could we not put them back in the physical office, but then we'd have to quarantine around that, and it just didn't work out. Non-work related stuff, that takes in a lot of room there. Let me get the context here. Non-work related stuff. I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but I would say just use your lean back on your training in terms of how far into that you would go. I'm just going to read into that question. Maybe someone said something on Facebook about COVID or a kid or something that you saw on social media that made you wonder, etc. I would just use your common sense on that and rely on your prior training. Okay, the next question is, what are the regulations around asking about, encouraging, or tracking employee vaccinations? Okay, I do have a slide on this, but I'm going to jump right at this one. So, okay, asking about. Okay, so the quick ones. Can you require a vaccination before return to work, or you know, a representation on that? Yeah, you can do that. Can you require people to have or give you the results of an antibody test? No. So that was an issue in the fall. I don't know if that's so much of an issue now, but the difference being an antibody test does not tell you whether or not you have it now, which is the legitimate inquiry. So it has no real medical value to you now. It's also, it's been determined by EEOC to be intrusive for no good medical reason. So don't do that. You can say if you're going to come back to work, you need to be vaccinated, which leads to more interesting questions. Yeah, encouraging tracking. Okay, a lot of, yeah, encouraging. There are a lot of companies that are strongly encouraging getting a vaccine, and to the point of giving them bonuses or paid time, etc. That raised an issue I did want to get to, which for those in the wage and hour area is very much a concern, which is if you strongly encourage as the employer that Jones goes to get vaccinated, the time that they go to get vaccinated, et cetera, especially if you're going to comp them for that or bonus them for that, does that create wage and hour time for purposes of, say, overtime? We don't have a direct answer on this, but I can tell you the best guidance we have so far was it was in the Federal Register from December, and I won't read you the quote, but the gist of it is that the Department of Labor's take is to compare this to exercise programs, smoking cessation, et cetera. So kind of generic programs for the wellness of employees, and they're not going to lump that in for wage and hour purposes, seems to be what they're saying here. So, you know, that's an important point, especially when you have a lot of employees that are being encouraged. Yeah, I'm trying to find the exact some useful language here, but in essence, they're saying that they're going to treat that similar to a wellness program, and they're not going to come back to the employer and say, look, you're creating a wage and hour issue here. So that's important. All right, let's see. Vaccination, right? Yeah, I'd be curious to know what you're all doing about the vaccination encouragement, but. Okay, now question 5. Once the self-assessment questionnaire is done by the employee, where should it be filed? Oh yeah, where should it be filed or not? How long should the questionnaire be retained and where? Yeah, very good question. I would treat this almost like an FMLA questionnaire. So I would keep it with obviously the medical side of the file to the extent you can, and in terms of retention, we don't have a direct answer on that yet, but I would treat that the same way that I would treat, say, records on an FMLA request, or something along those lines. So just keep it. We don't know how long DOL, either New Jersey or the federal government's going to require anything special about this. I don't think they will. I think it's just going to be lumped in with the general retention that you're doing right now for medical related information. But we should keep an eye on that in case something changes with that. I certainly wouldn't discard that in the near future unless you've checked back in and know for sure what the answer is. Okay, question: what can we do if an employee is asked to come to work and they say they can't because their children? Yes, yeah. This was a big problem in Pennsylvania. I guess most of y'all are in New Jersey. If they stay home, can I replace them? Okay, so the first question. Yeah. So if they are, well, if the children are learning remotely because of a state law requirement, then I would say I would leave them remote for the time being. If they stay home, can I replace them? I assume that means the employee. I wouldn't, because of FCCRA. I don't like it. I don't know how, to the extent that the ADA has been pulled into the New Jersey law against discrimination, how that's going to play against this. I wouldn't bet against it. I'll tell you that. So I think if someone is, especially at a public school, they have to look after underage children. I mean, 17-year-old, but underage children, I would be very wary of replacing those people. I think we haven't seen it yet, but I would think that's an area of litigation down the road, under probably NJLAD, using its ADA aspects. Yeah, I would avoid that. I would really avoid that. All right, let me see if there's anything more. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that goes to the what mistakes can we make going forward. And while it may not be it might be arguably technically looking like you can do it right now, I would just be wary of the application of the NJLAD to that kind of a question. Okay, I need to move my viewer here. Oh, we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to move along here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this slide talks about the emotional impact of COVID. It's difficult to know because we don't know everything about the employees or what they've been through, if they've experienced death in the family or a lot of just emotional distress over the whole scenario here that we've been through. So it's difficult to say how they respond to different things at work, and I'd be prepared for outbursts, strange comments, weird reactions from people, oversensitive reactions. If people say insensitive comments about COVID, obviously there are some political elements to this with mask wearing and not mask wearing, etc. You certainly want to be prepared for emotional reactions to comments that are being said. There may be some squabbling and yelling that just surprises you, that comes out of nowhere. So just be prepared for that. And this is something else that's a little off topic, but excuse me, well, maybe not, that I've spoken to people about, which is that a lot of what happened last year, we forget. Last year in New Jersey, COVID happened basically in March, right? So around the Ides of March, that's where the first executive orders were going in, and the lockdowns, et cetera. After that, we had a lot of things happen. The George Floyd incident, and Black Lives Matter, and a bunch of other political issues that occurred when all of these people were out, and now all these people are coming back together again, and they haven't had that normal kind of give and take. So bear that in mind when everyone's back together, that these kind of communications that usually get sorted out over time haven't had that opportunity to get sorted out. So be overly sensitive to that kind of a thing. Yeah, I think that can't be stressed enough. And it's not only that people have had, as I read the statistics earlier today about the amount of stress that people have been under. We're now taking them from, they had an office environment, with an office social environment, put them remote where they were detached and disassociated from their work life now, and stressed. And now we're bringing them back in part or in full. It really can't be underestimated that there will be a lot more strain on people as they kind of associate themselves with in-person work life. And when? Yeah, that's a good point. I have a lot of I have a large company that just has no intention of bringing people back to work. I'm trying to talk them out of it because I don't think it's a great business decision for them based on what they do. But the when, certainly anecdotally, I'll tell you that the rollout has begun in earnest. It's being staggered. There is tension between the people who want to save money and change office space and things of that nature, and those who want to get back right in and go back to business as normal. And most of us, you know, in legal and HR, we're kind of stuck in the middle on that. But regardless of when it actually happens, I think you need to have all of these things in place in these kinds of considerations. I need to move a little quickly here, so I'll just zip through these slides so that you have them. That's a nice checklist on your stage reentry. That's a slide on basically continuing the medical kind of checks and balances as you bring people in. There's a little bit on OSHA. I would stay in tune with OSHA. It's still an OSHA. It can be an OSHA reportable event if that's an area that you work with. If OSHA comes in, they will, and again, this doesn't apply to everybody, but if OSHA comes in, they will be looking for this kind of information that you have prepared. I expect you already had that by now. So I'll skip through this one quickly. This talks about the potential dangers in dictating to employees, or if they are doing activity which looks and smells like it might be union organization. And again, the same rules that you always applied, that you learned before, apply now on that kind of a thing. I talked about vaccine testing. In terms of leave issues and accommodation, I did touch on that before. I think you want to be very cognizant of people's special requests. I wouldn't bring people back en masse unless you have given them some kind of opportunity to express to you some kind of special issues that they have. Watch out for the stress request. You know, here's the doctor's note that says I can't come back because it's too stressful for me to return to this situation. So just be wary of those. Just check the time. Okay, a few more minutes. Okay. Oh yes. yes. The post-game analysis. It might be a little too early for that, but as we move forward in the next few months, you will be bringing people back in to the extent you're going to bring them back in, possibly with a look to bring back everybody, at least in a large sense. There will be changes, obviously, to the office structure, maybe even size of the office, how people use equipment differently, et cetera, the relationship, obviously, to IT. So there will be significant changes that you as HR have to deal with. Policies and handbooks. Yeah, you might want to get a look at that in terms of incorporating whatever changes occurred through COVID that you want to keep, particularly and obviously with regard to remote work. You know, that's got to be the discretion of the employer, so make sure that that's in there, underlined. The PPP question here, it doesn't really affect us so much in New Jersey as it does in obviously states like California. So I'm going to get to a question in a minute. Okay, let's do the rest of these. These are good slides just to keep an eye on. There's obviously our personal Constangy pages are quite up to date on this kind of a thing. So and there's some more resources for you there. So I'll go off to the questions. Okay. Okay, question 9. We have an owner who's, let me just see if I got all of these. Okay, so question 7, what if they can't work remotely and I need people? Well, you got to bring them back in then. If the company requires COVID-19 vaccine, can people refuse due to religious reasons? Ooh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I would treat that just like I would a religious accommodation question. So there's not quite the same protection that that you normally would. I haven't looked at that exact issue, but if it's like a Jehovah's Witness situation where they're refusing that, yeah, I would treat that just like an accommodation, and you may have to accommodate around that one. We have an owner who still likes to travel non-essentially. What owner doesn't? What is the minimum amount of time we can tell them not to come back to the office? Just follow the state. Yes. yeah, follow the state guidelines on that, and you're 100% correct there. Question 10, would this be the time to change a job description to include COVID-19 regulations? Wouldn't that be viewed as discriminatory? Yeah, I think so. Certainly the answer to the first part of that question would be yes, as they're coming back in. And the second part of your question is interesting, which you're going to say, well, yeah, that seems awfully convenient. They're coming back in. Now you're going to change my job description. To the extent that you're changing the job description to work around a legitimate return to work need, absolutely go ahead. Wouldn't that be viewed as discriminatory? I don't see how like a generic change that goes around COVID restrictions could be seen as discriminatory unless it applies only to a certain group of or class of worker. So the answer is that, yeah, if it has an impact on only one group, it could be seen that way. And the way around that problem, of course, is to keep it as generic as possible. Health-related, open-ended, objective, non-discriminatory, etc. So as you know, I don't have to tell you all on the phone this. Is it directly discriminatory versus does it have a discriminatory impact? If it has a discriminatory impact, it is what it is, but you just have to apply it as uniformly as you can among that job description, that job level. Okay, here we go. Last question is, okay, it's not going to check. 7, let me go back here. What if they can't work remotely and I need people? I had some more detail on that question. If they can't work remotely, it kind of begs the question of what they've been doing for the last year. They can't work. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, of course, if they can't do the job remotely, the employer has the right to have them do the job. So I would say if you're looking at,
I just got a follow-up for that question, John.
Yeah, is it considering termination? Is that where we're going there?
The attendee said because they had children at home.
Yeah, again, I would be cautious with that. I'd be really cautious with that. Especially if they're young kids where the state has not brought them back full time, and there's a caretaker. I've had this issue come up, and especially in the split between the two parents, who's going to look after the child, etc. I would be very cautious with that one. I really would. I know that you can make a technical argument for saying, sorry, you've got to come back, but I am concerned that the New Jersey law against discrimination is going to kick in here at some point. Say, you fired this person because of this reason. Do you really want a jury to answer that question? I would not. I mean, look, if there's no way around it, if there's a business need and management is on the warpath, I would strongly caution them on that question. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, it's unfortunate we don't have a live. Can't see you all because there would be 50 over 60 of you there, but yeah. 6 was, what can I do if an employee is asked to come to work and they say they can't because their children are learning remotely? Yeah, I might also say there's a lifespan on this question, and here we are in March in New Jersey. I can't say, and I'm sure that you all might have a better idea of when exactly the public schools are going to be reopening across the board like that, but they will be reopening. And for this kind of brief span here, I think you have to balance what exactly it is about this person's job that they can't do remotely against the risk of possibly an NJLAD issue down the road on that one, because certainly in the past legislation that would be a violation. So I would recommend against that. I would definitely caution them. Even now, and the feedback you're going to get from management or the other team members is going to be, well, how is that fair to this other person who has to come in? And well, I mean, it isn't, but I would say from a as a litigator from the risk analysis, I'm not worried about the other person complaining about disparate treatment. I'm more worried about this person being able to claim 6 months down the road that terminating them because they wanted to look after their child was a form of accommodation request that was not met by the employer, even though the school's open 3 months later. That is not something you want to put in front of a jury. Okay, here's another question. If a COVID-19 vaccine is required by a company, can a person refuse to get it for certain health reasons? Yes. So that would fall under an ADA type issue. So there may be people who cannot have it, and they should not be required to have it for that reason, because it would violate their ADA rights. And 1004, question 12. If all staff is vaccinated, can we seat them in common area? Yeah, that's kind of the, isn't it fun how the CDC keeps moving around on that one? But as I understand it this morning, vaccinations, the time period for waiting is about 2 weeks for this point, and then there's the question of are you scot-free at that point? CDC is being very mushy on that topic. Theoretically, yes. I would still err on the side of putting some space between people, etc. But I can't think of a logical reason why you couldn't do that. If you know they're all vaccinated, that it's been 2 weeks, etc. Again, look to CDC. But I think in retrospect, if you're going ahead and doing that, and you throw in some, keep the hand washing, keep people spread out a little bit for a little bit of time, I think you're safe. Yeah. I keep your eye on the governor's office, but certainly from the CDC perspective, there's really, as I understand it, no medical reason why that would make sense to keep people apart under that scenario. All right, folks. Well, look, I've appreciated the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't go purely live interactive on this one, because it looks like there's a lot more to talk about here. Maybe we can do a follow-up down the road, Anna, on this. Might be a good idea. But thanks everybody for your questions. And if you have anything else you want to follow up on, and I apologize, I may have not understood your question exactly through the chat. Feel free to hit me via email, and I'll do my best to answer the question, or give you a quick call as needed. It's not a problem. All right, well, thanks again, Anna. I don't know if you want to wait for another question, or do you want to close it up?
I think we can close it up.
All right. Again, folks, if you have any issues, just shoot me an email, and I'll